It is
It's
what
Friday.
what day? It's Friday. Yes. What better way to start the weekend than with a Ziti TV, right? It's 11 o'clock on the East Coast, anyway.
Yep.
People stopping working now, right? Like half day Friday. Is that what we're doing?
Little early lunch, maybe a long lunch.
Maybe a long lunch. Maybe take a walk. Enjoy
Start to get
yourself.
some of that well-earned rest.
Well, let's hope you've earned it. So, what are we doing today, Ken?
Today we're going to talk about a couple of different things. Let's see. We're going to start out with no release notes. It's going to be a no op. Guess we
Yay!
don't have anything major that came down the pike this week.
I'm
So
I'm
let's
I'm,
just
I'm
get
somewhat miffed, Ken, that we're already talking about all of this, and you have not mentioned the new format of our slide here.
well, I'm just happy I finally got onto MTV.
ZD TV. There's no MTV here. This is ZD TV.
My brain is just like that says MTV, but
Well, I
I'm with
can
you.
I can understand the influence that you would make that
Being a 90s
leap.
child. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Some of us actually remember watching videos on MTV. I wonder how many watching this actually watched videos. Comment in the chat, leave a message, tell us you watched MTV, tell us you appreciate the ZDTV logo. We can thank our esteemed designer Dave Finger for
It
coming
looks
up
great.
coming up. It always does. He has the magic touch.
It
It
really
is
does.
something which I have a tremendous amount of jealousy for this particular talent. Making things look pretty is such a difficult thing, and he makes it look so easy. So thanks to Dave
He
Finger.
does.
He did not want to do this for me. He hated every moment, but I'm sure everybody appreciates
Oh,
it,
was this made to order
loves
then?
it. Well, I mean, like it's like, you know how it goes, Ken. 2 days ago, I'm like, "Hey, Dave, can you give me a new thumbnail slide? I kind of hate my pink." Like if you go back and look at the other ones, I'm like, mine are
Okay.
ugly. They're ugly. I said, Dave, can you make this look not so ugly? And then Dave came up with this, and so he succeeded. So here's
James
hope.
says he can neither confirm nor deny that he ever watched MTV. He
All
may or
right.
may not be old enough to remember that. So we're going to jump right into replacing SSH bastions. Clint, what is an SSH bastion?
Ooh, boy, Ken, putting me on the spot. Ken knows I am not a network engineer, and this is a weakness of mine. However, what I know of an SSH bastion is it is specifically a SSH server that is running somewhere on the open internet that basically provides an entry point further into your network. So,
Sure.
like the name implies, a bastion. It's the tip of the spear, so to speak, is the thing way out in the front, and its job in life is to be a central point for you to be able to access your further
Sure.
resources securely.
A lot of what you're saying is how people typically use a bastion. If we were to zoom out to what it really means, what it really is in its most primitive form, a bastion is a castle. And people typically use them as proxies to go, like you said, one level deeper into the network or to protect a very specific set of resources. And so that castle has a guarded front entryway, and we usually use a secure protocol. And in this case, an SSH bastion is just the protocol that's being used to guard that front door and to provide the proxy. So in the case of SSH, you can't do just any old protocol you want through SSH. That is, you need to be able to do it over TCP, and you need to be able to configure your apps to use SSH somehow in order to, that is, to tunnel their TCP. Anyway, it gets kind of complicated, but it's definitely one of the tools of the trade for infrastructure engineers to be able to get from point A to point B without punching holes in the firewall that just anybody can use.
But it is a hole in the firewall, is it not?
Well, the firewall makes exceptions for the bastion when we're talking about the host specifically. So the host that's providing this shelter, the host that's providing this castle around your sheltered assets, that host has firewall exceptions. And so you need
Sure.
to be able to proxy through that host in order to take advantage of those firewall exceptions.
Sure. So it is so a bastion is out on the open internet. It is listening on a port, and since we're talking SSH, we know that that port will be port 22, right?
Typically,
Um,
yep. It certainly
yeah.
doesn't have to be, and it doesn't have to be on the open internet. It does need to be
Oh,
listening
good
on a
point.
port.
Good
Yeah.
point.
So it's just one level deeper in the network. You could have a stack of 3 different layers, and you need to have permission on the first bastion to get to the second layer, and so on. I've certainly
Yeah.
seen that in production before.
So you've had two bastions that you've had to hop through.
Yeah, I've seen 3 layers total with 2 separate bastions. It was a pretty typical stack where you got DMZ, then applications, then databases, and they had a separate bastion for each layer.
Gotcha. Well, neat. I actually used the whole that whole motif in one of my presentations. I was pulling up my fun little castle and moat diagram to go back to your bastion whole point of view.
Oh yeah,
So just to reinforce the whole idea, the castle and the moat idea is certainly one that you see reused time and time again.
totally. All right, so the object of our topic here is to completely replace SSH bastions. So nothing wrong with SSH bastions. Um, you want to use the right tool for the job, but in the case of SSH, there is that complexity factor, and it's also one layer of security. So if the only thing between a determined, resourceful attacker is your SSH bastion, and the prize on the other side of that bastion is high enough, then you really need more than one layer of security. So that's why we talk about defense in depth. We talk about layers of security. We talk about a $1,000 lock for a $10,000 bicycle. Using these metaphors to describe, you want the scales to balance as far as the value of the prize on one side and the commensurate security measures on the other.
And now, why is it that we're even talking about this today? What has sparked this particular Ziti TV and talking about bastions?
Well, back in the early days before OpenZiti was a thing, NetFoundry was already a thing, and we were starting to build OpenZiti. And we needed some bastions. We started using SSH bastions just in the typical way to protect those build environments where where we were literally building OpenZiti. So it's kind of an incubation period that we were in, and so we came out of that. Once we had a viable OpenZiti, we realized, well, we can start using this. We can use this to start modernizing and advancing our security posture for things like our defenses against the scenario I just described, where somebody wants to knock on that front door and try to sneak inside and maybe steal something. So
But
we
now
found
you're
a way to go ahead.
I was gonna say, but you're talking now about the OpenZD's parent project company, right? The company we work for, NetFoundry, right?
That's right.
What?
Yep.
Gotcha. So we had NetFoundry, the company, is providing OpenZD overlay networks as a service, and when those networks were created, there are still times when an administrator has to be able to get to those machines for what kind of reasons? Like upgrades, maybe logs, I guess.
Yep. The SSH interface is now you could be accessing any particular server. SSH is an example of a server that you might want to shelter with a bastion. So just not to confuse that the fact that we're using SSH for the bastion proxy protocol doesn't mean that the thing that we're trying to get to is SSH also.
So
It
I
could
could
be a
use.
web server.
That's what I was going to ask. So
Yeah.
a bastion can serve any protocol. It's not just SSH.
Yep, as long as you can convince your client side to use the SSH tunnel that's being provided through configuration. For example, if I wanted to use my web browser to go through an SSH bastion, I need to go into the proxy settings and tell it to use socks,
I see.
and then give it the port that I configured on my SSH tunnel, and then I can shoot through. Rabbit goes in the hole, goes through the magical tunnel, pops out of the hole, and goes on its merry way from the network perspective of the SSH bastion at that point. So the server that's inside that protected zone is going to see that origin IP of the bastion itself, not my
Mm.
IP on my laptop.
Well, that's actually one of those interesting OpenZiti superpowers too. And I speak about this particular one, which is I call it addressability. But um, as an application developer, which OpenZiti obviously is targeting app developers as providing a server side application. In the
Right.
past, I would want to know who was knocking on my door, so to speak. And so when traffic enters a load balancer, or in this case, maybe a bastion, or really any piece of like Nginx, right, a reverse proxy, anything that effectively becomes the source of the traffic. I know in my own experience, it was really a painful experience because, like you said, it appears as though all your traffic comes from that single node. That has benefits, I think, because you could probably whitelist that particular IP address on the application side, right? Like I imagine people do that too, so that they only allow traffic incoming from that particular bastion or a set of bastions because they know
Right.
that those are
Yeah.
valid. But OpenZiti just kind of makes all this melt away, I think. Would you
Right.
agree?
But I would agree that there's a point of arrival that we can imagine for pretty much any network environment that makes all of that pain go away, because it gives you that logical flat superhighway where it's everything's a straight shot from application to application.
A logical
And
straight shot.
a logical straight shots from the
Yeah.
application's perspective. It doesn't care about networking anymore because the relationship to the network has been commoditized in a way. There's no special configuration needed. The overlay does everything as far as giving you permission and getting you there. So that's what we call the delivery part. Like that's we're delivering applications from point A to point B. So yeah, all that pain goes away, but not all organizations, not all teams, not all projects can make that leap all at once. And that's why we're talking about Bastion still, even though we have Ziti,
Well, I mean, we
because
we were one of those organizations, right?
we are
So
exactly
so like you said, we had set everything up, and once it's all set up, there's a lot of inertia behind it to just leave it there.
right. So one of the goals of introducing a ZD Bastion, to introduce a term, one of the goals there is to allow business as usual to continue with very minor intrusive changes, if any. So we don't want to have to retrain everybody or completely, use a new system. Sometimes orgs have to do that kind of thing, but try to avoid it, right? So
Yeah, well,
that's what we were able to do, and
in
we wrote a
fact,
blog about that.
well, and so speaking of the blog, but yesterday you and I were talking, and we didn't have a topic for Ziti TV yet, as often is the case. And so I said, "Hey," we were just having a conversation, and I know in the past we've said things like, "Oh, geez, Ken, when we get together, we should just start recording because some of the stuff that we talk about is, I think, relatively interesting, and we could just publish it." And so yesterday we were talking, and it was about this exact topic, and I went, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Hey, this would be a pretty neat ZDTV
Let's
because you."
just go live with it.
Yeah, let's just bottle all this up, put a cork on it for today, and we'll come back tomorrow and we'll do it live and we'll see what happens. Um, so, like you were saying, we didn't want to introduce a tremendous amount of change, but at the same time, we do have a North Star, right? We have a North Star that is our vision of where we want to take things. And as I'm fond of talking about the journey, every company will go on a zero trust journey. And I really do believe this. Every application will go on that journey, and so oftentimes you start with the lowest friction change. And I think that's kind of what your first blog here that I know you wrote, and let's get your picture there.
Yep.
I think that's what your first blog gets into. Would you agree with that? Like that's where
You're
we
right.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is about that first step. It's definitely a journey, a multi-step journey. And the first step here, I'll describe the stages of this journey, or the legs of the journey as I see them. So our first step here, we're starting with SSH bastions, and those bastions were exposed to the internet, and their purpose was to proxy any connections into the private zone. It's not a secret zone necessarily, but it's not directly accessible from the internet. And so in order to access things like the Jenkins server or the like some microservices or databases or things like that, we had zones set up for that. And so those bastions, SSH was facing the internet, directly exposed, and SSH is pretty secure. But back to that layered security approach, right? All right, so the first step was to simply require Ziti to get to the bastions themselves. This adds one more layer. And this is a picture of what it looked like before the first stage of the journey was reached. So on the left, you've got a variety of devices using the internet, and Mallory's out there too, directly accessing the internet just like everybody else.
Is Mallory the bad guy?
Yes.
Nice.
And the Alice and Bob pantheon of characters, Mallory is typically your malicious character.
Is that right? It's Mallory?
It's
I
one of the malicious
I
characters,
don't
yeah.
think I've ever seen Mallory. I've seen Alice and Bob, but I don't know. I don't remember who the
Alice and Bob are totally innocent. It's Mallory who's up
yeah.
to no good. Yeah.
Yeah, so if anybody out there has not seen, there's I'm going to do while Ken talks. I'm going to go find the video. There's a really great one that talks about Alice and Bob, and if you don't know who Alice and Bob are, you should. You should.
It's good to know. It's good to know.
You
It's
should. You
useful. These
should.
are useful primitives for explaining cryptography.
Yeah, and there's a really great
Basically,
one. There's a really great one about color, and it's about Alice and Bob in the same sort of ways. And I'm going to go find
yeah.
it while you continue.
All right, you do that. Alice and Bob are not decidedly malicious, but they are not. They're separate parties, so they're not necessarily trusting one another. And so we often use them to describe two different signs, like two different sides of an asymmetric key operation or public key cryptography, something like that. All right, so everybody's on the internet. Everybody can see the bastion because there's a firewall hole right there that lets you punch straight through whatever cloud environment or data center and talk to the application. So this is kind of a crude root terminal looking thing, this little blue rectangle on the far right there. And as you can see, there's an SQL server, which is representative of the kinds of things you might want to protect with one layer of security. So let's scroll down now
So
to the other diagram.
would you say here I am using SSH because this is about bastions
Mhm.
and SSH? I'm getting onto a console and then from there accessing the SQL server. Is that what that
Well,
represents?
you're probably not logging in because it would be a poor operational practice to allow any kind of login on the bastion. You're
No, no,
probably
no,
just
no, no. I'm going through the bastion
through it.
into a different console. So, like, for example, 20 plus years ago, when I was maintaining a database, the database was in Detroit. I was in Rochester, and I would go through the bastion to get onto the production database. But I would do that through SSH. And then once I was there, I could type my Oracle commands to maintain the database. It was Sybase at the
Right.
time, but whatever. Right.
Right. Yeah, it's a better operational practice to only allow proxying, not login on the bastion, because once you log into a multi-user system, then you expose dramatically more vulnerabilities on that multi-user system. And insider threats are, orders of magnitude greater if you allow login there. And of course, anyone's credentials could be stolen at any time, and then they can attack the bastion directly. And this is as good as not having a bastion. So this is kind of the after. Would you be able to zoom in on that a little bit, Clint? Cool. So after we see the arrow that's going through the firewall has now changed. Before, it was a TCP/22 exception that allowed people on the internet to get to the bastion through the firewall. But now there is no inbound port whatsoever. There's no server listener. And this is a ubiquitous feature of using something like OpenZiti, is that you can shut down network access. Everything that needs to talk on the network creates a reverse TCP tunnel back to itself by reaching out through whatever firewalls or NATs are present there. So it's as if they don't exist because the ZD fabric that you see in the center there is providing all of the authorization and transport that you need or any direction. So you've got arrows going both directions there. And as far as things that are reaching out to the internet, the arrows always point towards the internet. Now Mallory's a little confused because everybody's using OpenZiti and there's nothing to attack.
Very cool. I couldn't find my mute button. um,
Applause.
oops, we are not visible. Let's make ourselves visible. Come on, we're gonna undo the boom. Oh,
I got it.
we fought with each other.
Competition. Yes.
Yeah, yes. So we've now successfully replaced a bastion that is listening on the open internet, right? So
Right.
that was step one of your blog, is to do that. Is that right?
That's right. Just change the direction that the traffic is flowing across the firewalls so that there's no longer any inroad. There's no exposed port. There's no surface area for attack. How many different ways can we say this? Basically, Mallory is confused. And unless somebody gives Mallory not they needed the SSH identity before in order to do anything useful, but they could attack even without permission. So here's a metaphor that I like to use to describe this key distinction, um, and this is actually in the blog. But if you have a secret map to my house, and you have a unique pin that I created just for you that lets you get in the front gate, then you're allowed to ask. Then you're allowed to ask to come inside by knocking on my front door. That's the metaphor for having permission to do that. Is you actually have to know how to get to my house because you can't look it up in a secret directory. Now this is in stark
So
contrast to
this is an OpenZiti. That would be the equivalent
that's an
of doing it.
OpenZiti. That's right.
Gotcha. I thought you
Yeah.
started with the bastion. I was confused.
Well, the before was that you could just, if you know my name, you can look at my house number, you can just walk right up to my front door and start knocking. And that's
But
pretty typical for your neighborhood, for your average front door. But again, layers of security. There's an advantage to having that, having basically an invisible house that you can't get to unless you know how to pass through the veil to the other side. And then you have to still be able to get through the front gate. And all that does is give you permission to knock on the front door.
gotcha. So we started talking about what was next here, which I thought was pretty neat as well. So step one in our journey was to remove the bastion from the internet, so it's no longer attackable.
Right.
What is step two?
Step two is to make it to use Ziti to do the proxying itself rather than SSH. So today it's like a two-step process. You have to have as long as you have your Ziti turned on, then you can use SSH just like you did before. And it's transparent. You don't even know you're using Ziti because you're just using the same domain names and passwords and everything, or keys rather. But tomorrow, after we do step two, then you're not using SSH anymore. So it actually removes one of the things that you had already gotten used to doing, which is using the SSH proxy. Instead, you just go directly to the thing. Remember the logical direct
But I'm
paths?
but I'm not getting rid of SSH yet, right? You're saying I'm not using SSH anymore, and
Hmm.
that wasn't what I thought we would be doing for step
Okay,
two, because that's a bigger leap.
here's what we're doing today. We're using an SSH proxy to get to the target. The target might be a web server or it might be another SSH server. Got that
Right.
set?
Right.
Okay. And then what we're going to do tomorrow with stage two is that we're going to go direct to the target with Ziti.
Okay. So if I can translate, right now, I have a ZD tunneler running on my local computer. In fact, I'll bring it up even though I don't have my bastion. Uh-oh, I can't bring it up. Where'd it go? It's hiding on me. Um, I don't have my bastion network access. I had to remove the identity, but I have my tunneler right here. You can see I do have Mattermost, which is our chat app, so I can do
Right.
Mattermost talking. But I have another identity that gives me access to our, I think we called it the Bastion network, um,
Yep,
and
something like that.
that lets my local computer. So
Your
if I
laptop,
go,
yeah. Yep.
yeah, so if I were to open up a text prompt and I was to type SSH, I could SSH from here to private machine whatever. right? I could do that. And I would have to give it a minus J, which is the proxy jump command, right?
Hmm.
Or I could give it the longer proxy jump, and that means my SSH is going through that bastion. It's not
Correct.
it's not going directly. It's going through the bastion, and you're
Indirectly.
it's indirect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now to me as the user, I'm still SSHing to the machine. So it feels like I'm going directly there, but I'm
Yeah.
getting there via a bastion. So I've had to do something special to configure the proxy jump.
Type
And
the
you're
word bastion after your J there so we can complete the picture. This is
gotcha.
exactly the way things look, both before this first stage of the journey and after the first stage of the journey. The only difference there was that we're using Ziti to do the SSH jump proxy.
Right. And over here is where I have the user. So it looks
Right.
like
I don't
this,
know if
right?
it has to go before or after, but basically those two parts are important. The user at private machine is your target, and then your jump box is your bastion.
Right. And
So
so the next stage, how does this command change?
you just remove the last part, the jump
Oh,
box.
I just do this.
Yes.
Oh, I see. So now as a user, I don't have to understand what a proxy server or a proxy jump command is. So
Right.
it's a bit easier on the typing.
Right. Instead of setting up a like a proxy user account for a new if a new girl joins us and we want to give her access to the private machine, instead of giving her a bastion proxy user like we gave you, we would instead give her a ZD service that goes to that private machine, or just add her to the policy that already grants her identity she already has to the
Now
same private machine.
now what is I can think of one. I'm going to see if you come up with the same one. What is the immediate benefit of replacing the Bastion server with a ZD Bastion, if you will?
Well, it makes everything that we're doing for administration a lot more visible. Is
How
one
so?
thing. So like our our chief of our lead DevOps engineer can look at everybody that's using each private machine. That could be private machine 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So they can see exactly who is using which one, how much, whether
I
somebody's
I can't do that
swiping up.
with a Bastion.
Well, it's just not really. I mean, this is it's feasible that you could roll your own, but it's free out of the box with the
Mm.
kind of visibility that you get with an overlay. So you can see how much people are using it. You can turn off anybody's access instantly with no
See, that
shared
that was the one.
credentials.
That was the one that I liked. Yeah, go into that a little
With
bit.
so depending on the target, so if it's private machine, that kind of implies SSH. We're using SSH as an example. So like somehow you still have to have a key to the front door, which is a key that gets you in to that private machine. So new girl, whenever she joins, is going to need to have that private key, or we're going to need to have some kind of it's like a separate problem to grant to grant the key to the front door than it is to grant the secret map and the pin to the front gate. Two separate problems. So this solution gives you the pin to the front gate and the secret map to the front door, but it doesn't solve the front door key problem. That problem still exists, and we just solve it separately. But today, if private machines 1 through 10 all use the same identity for whatever reason, all use the same private key authorization, then you would need to set up some kind of certificate-based system that works with SSH, most likely, so that you can grant certificates that have an expiration time, maybe 4 hours in the future or 8 hours or whatever, and then give those certificates to the users. And then the machines, when they were first birthed, would have been set up to honor certificates from a particular CA. And so that CA can just issue certificates, SSH certificates specifically, all day long to anybody that needs them. They can log into that production system for a limited amount of time. And this is the basis of Bless, which is Netflix's homegrown SSH authorization system.
So they do it on a time based thing. Is what you mean?
Yep. Yep. They just set up some software that lets a manager approve an employee asking for access to production. They get a certificate.
Yep.
That certificate is honored by the server, and so you could use that with Ziti,
Sure.
or we could use. There's a bunch of really cool pub key authentication, like distribution mechanisms. AWS has one built into their system manager, and saying various different ways of expressing the idea that I want this person to be able to access that box for a limited amount of time.
Cool. So, so those are some of the ideas I had too that I thought were pretty neat. So it's nice to see that we are on the same page there. Um, and that would be me using SSH to not. I will. It'll be simpler for me. I can just SSH to whatever the machine name is or the IP address. Now, when I access that SSH machine, I can either put in a password or I can present a certificate, right? And
It just depends on how the
that's not gonna
target is configured. Yeah.
yeah, that doesn't change, does it?
No, that's still the key to the front door, and there's no change at all to that mechanism with this solution.
Okay. And so, what do we have a step 3 planned? Like, so let's say we're gonna take this to, all the way to our North Star. What is our North Star?
Well, yeah, there is another stage, and I'll have to bring in one more detail from the current stage to make the distinction. So there's a remember Ziti is transparent because we're doing this. We're using the terms like logical or direct flight, like it flattens the network so everything's a peer. What I'm saying is that when you're using the SSH Bastion in today's setup, you don't see the ZD that you're using. You just keep using SSH like you did before. And in tomorrow's setup, where there is no SSH Bastion, you're using a ZD Bastion transparently to get there. And in the next week's setup, which would be the next stage, then there is no ZD Bastion at all. And the service is actually being hosted, the ZD service is being hosted on the target itself. So this is really an orchestration problem for the targets, and it solves that front door key problem too.
So, if I can understand, right now, we'll have some entry point over the overlay into our private networking space. And that was what the bastion is. It's an entry point into a private networking space. But from that bastion, I can get to any computer that is in the network, correct?
Correct.
And so what you're saying is the next step of the evolution is to take the effectively the bastion and
Yeah.
remove it from having network access and orchestrate it and deliver it to individual machines so that there's basically a bastion on every machine. And that bastion only gives you access to only that machine.
Yeah. Just
Is that do I have that
I
right?
mean, Clint, just imagine increasingly tiny castles, and you've
Increasingly
got it.
tiny castles. I love it.
Yes.
I love it.
The ever
Castles
collapsing
all the way
perimeter.
down.
It's castles all the way down. They're full of turtles. But
Oh my goodness, that's a new image, Ken. A little turtle poking out of a castle. That would
ah, the 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 perimeter. When we talk about VPNs, usually we talk about a pretty big perimeter. So you write policies like, I don't know exactly what users are using, and now that there's a pandemic, everybody has to go home and they have to keep using the same stuff. So I'm just going to write a policy that says if you're in the user network, you can talk to production,
sure.
and you've got a really big perimeter. Anybody
Yep.
that's in the user network, whether they're supposed to be there or not, can now talk to production, behind the firewall. So that's why zero trust is a thing, because that's completely unacceptable over the long term. But you can move to, really, you can balance complexity and labor, against the maintenance cost and increasing sophistication, and get that perimeter down somewhat. I'm trying to center
Yep.
here. So you can get your perimeter down somewhat from a normal VPN by writing better rules, and you can have a bunch of rings, that look like a Venn diagram that kind of overlap in a certain way, and you can get by with that. And you need a team of people basically to maintain that for thousands of person organization. And then if you go to something like OpenZiti, there's a little bit of development cost up front, but it's very reasonable, and it's a friendly framework. And then you basically have a kind of autopilot where there's just a pinhole from each application, and you can get it all the way down to the process space, which is very, very specific. You can go down to individual hosts or individual processes, and you no longer have a big perimeter where other things can wedge themselves in where they're not supposed to be.
Yeah, and to get down to the individual process, does that mean we would have to be app embedded, or do you see a different way to get into the process where it's not application embedded?
I do
To
mean
me,
that, yeah, that
yeah,
implies modifying the source code of the application or installing a plugin that already has the ability to hook into the
yeah.
application to modify its network
Mm.
connectivity in at least one direction, because you got incoming and outgoing networking, and you would need to be able to modify at least one of those depending on the needs of the application, whether it's a client or server or both, to be able to basically go off of the normal network onto the overlay.
Now, yeah, you know what? I wasn't planning on this, but I would wonder if you would agree with me that
All right.
this also kind of fits into something that I did recently for Prometheus, which is allowing a machine from anywhere to be able to talk to Prometheus servers. These Kubernetes ingress nodes, would you say they're a form of a bastion?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It depends on how you write them, right? And so, what you're talking about with application embedded is actually being able to do something along these lines, where you take the ZD bits. Not why is that not? Yeah, and you actually bake it into the application itself, where
Right.
now you don't have a separate application like over here where we're running a ZD host pod. You actually have it baked in, which I think makes a lot of sense to me. So are we on the Bastion, going back to the Bastions now, are we thinking about either client side? Because there's two sides, right? There's the intercept side of SSH, and then there's the far side, the server side. Do we have any plans to like make it easier? Like, I know we have ZSSH. Obviously, I know that it's out there, but are is using ZSSH on our next month plan to use your day, month, week um, metaphor?
You're asking is using ZSSH on the plan. So you would be able to use ZSSH, which, quick recap, is a command line interface, very much like OpenSSH client, which is normally just SSH in the terminal. And it uses Ziti instead of the normal network in order to communicate with the target server. So it's still speaking SSH, but it's creating its own little tunnel for its SSH connection so that it
But
can
it's
reach things that it wouldn't normally be able to reach.
Yeah, and the magic of ZSSH is that you don't need a a tunneling application to use it. So you don't need that desktop edge for Windows or Mac or whatever, right?
Yeah,
It's its own application and it has ZD baked into it. Do we have
sure.
plans to use the SSH?
Not a specific plan, but you certainly could. You could choose between using a general purpose tunneler, and tunnel and tunneler are loaded terms around here because we can talk about the reverse TCP tunnel that an endpoint needs to create, and whether that's an SDK app or a tunneler, it's still a reverse TCP tunnel. And then you've got reverse SSH and forward SSH tunnels. Anyway, I won't go into it, but there's a general purpose tunneler, which purpose is to configure an operating system with an identity or more than one identity to have access to ingress or egress certain ZD services. The ZSSH is an example of a different kind of SDK app that is not a general purpose tunneler, but it just creates a tunnel for its own application, the one application that it's talking to at that particular moment,
Right.
a ZD tunnel.
So do we have do we have plans to use the SSH or no? Or is it am I just too
No,
aspirational here?
no, what I said is that we don't have specific plans to use it, but you could use it. You could use it with either the general purpose tunneler or ZSSH.
Oh, so whenever when we can I use the SSH right now then? No, I can't because it doesn't support the Bastion, the proxy jump. But
Correct.
once you have replaced the need for an SSH bastion, would I be able to use ZSSH at that point?
At that point, yes, you would be able to use ZSSH in tomorrow's
Have
future.
you have you so to bring it back to OpenZiti configuration stuff, we're talking when I think of ZSSH, I think of addressable terminators, and we don't really have any of this stuff planned yet, right? It's all just we're just two guys talking at this point. But so you think we would be able to use an addressable terminator, which would allow me to type ZSSH space, remote machine, just like I would type SSH. That should work, you're thinking?
It will work, yes.
Yeah.
It's the missing piece that hasn't been done yet, is the orchestration piece for the targets servers themselves. So the services and the servers um, would need to be done eventually for all of the planned stages that we've discussed. But just for tomorrow, all we would need is orchestrated services. Those are Ziti services. So we would just need to have that addressable terminator created so that ZSSH can access it. Because the implementation detail that you might be missing is that in the next stage of the ZD Bastion's journey, the services will be terminated by the same kind of Bastion host. It just won't be an SSH Bastion anymore. It would be a router tunneler that's providing the service termination for something
Gotcha.
like an SSH target server.
Cool. Cool. Well, we've been just jibber jabbering about
Jibba jabba.
SSH for like 40 minutes now. We do have some people watching on the live stream. Hello, people. Are
Hi,
there any
everybody.
are there any questions from anybody that does it sound neat? Is there anything people want us to cover? Otherwise, I think we're gonna end up wrapping up soon. So we'll hang out here and see if there's any if chat see if chat has any things that they want to talk about or
Yeah,
any
ask
things
away.
they want to put on the old. I'll show it on the screen. If you just want to say hi, you can just say hi. Other than that, I think we're going to be wrapping up here in a minute. So we can sit here and just enjoy the day. It's a nice day in Western New York. Is it a nice day where you are, Ken?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Nice. It was supposed to rain, I thought, based on the forecasts. All right. Well, we have no chats coming in. So I think with that, then, Ken, I think we're good. You good?
I'm good.
All right. Well, hey, it's nice talking to you, and we'll see you next time on Ziti TV. See ya.